Und damit starten wir jetzt auch auf der Innovation Stage in unser Programm. Da werden wir verschiedene Themen heute behandeln. Am Vormittag geht es unter anderem um Diversity und Inclusion am Arbeitsplatz, um Weiterbildung und Future Skills und Nachhaltigkeit in der Unternehmenskultur. Wir freuen uns ab jetzt zu jeder Session auch auf Ihre Inputs, auf Ihre Fragen und Kommentare. Dazu können Sie ganz einfach die Live-Diskussion-Funktion auf unserer Event-Plattform nutzen und Ihre Fragen und Kommentare kommen dann hier bei mir im Studio an und ich werde sie an unsere Speaker und Speakerinnen übermitteln und ja, mit Ihnen gemeinsam diskutieren. Nutzen Sie gerne auch unsere Event-Plattform für alle möglichen Dinge. Sie können sich da natürlich zu unserem Programm informieren. Sie können da Ihre eigene Agenda zusammenstellen und sich auch mit anderen Teilnehmenden vernetzen. Wir freuen uns außerdem, wenn Sie auch über die sozialen Medien, über Work und Culture sprechen, und zwar mit dem Hashtag WorkCulture22. Ja, und wie gesagt, freue ich mich sehr auf eine aktive Diskussion heute mit Ihnen gemeinsam. Es geht jetzt weiter hier auf der Hauptbühne und zwar mit unserer einzigen englischsprachigen Session hier auf der Main Stage. This next keynote is going to cover everything that you need to know about HR in the digital age. On transformation and talent of the future, please give a warm welcome to Sarena Lin, Chief Transformation and Talent Officer at Bayer. Welcome, Sarena.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of the Becomes Work and Culture 2022. Really honored to be here to share the perspective of transformation and talent. I think, needless to say, the context gives us a new meaning of what does it mean, the world that we live in today. So I thought I'll take a couple moments and share some of the perspectives that we are developing around this topic. But more importantly, as you said, have a dialogue of what are the learnings and how do we actually move forward in this. Okay, so let me perhaps share a couple of slides and hopefully you can see them so that we can get the dialogue going. So let's start by thinking about the changing role of HR. I think the role of HR and specifically the role of our leaders are truly taking on a new meaning, especially during the pandemic. I think as we've seen in the crisis of the pandemic, as well as the crisis that we are in right now, we see these external factors continue to really define the profile of an organization and the profile of a leader. And how do we think about leading, not just now, but also leading into the future? I think the truth is, in today's world, strategy can be copied and competed away. Capital is relatively abundant and accessible. And transformation, it seems, become a new normal. So what ultimately is going to truly set an organization apart and hold itself together is not strategy, and I would dare say not even a balance sheet, right? But really is the ability to adapt to the environment, the resilience of its culture, and the ability for its leaders to say, we need to continue to evolve so that we really understand how we address the crisis there or the changes that we're in. So I thought I'll start the conversation by sharing some of my thoughts on some of these key factors that you see here on the page. What's the implication for future of work, especially how the pandemic has completely changed the order of activities among people, work, and workplace? What does it mean in terms of leadership? What do we need to steer the teams, especially through this type of environment? What does it mean for HR, especially in terms of talent management, to increase the ability of relevance from a talent perspective? And last but not least, what does inclusion and diversity, how is it becoming both an opportunity and a challenge in this future world? Okay, so let's dive into each of these topics just slightly to start the creativity going. Let's start by the future of work. The truth is, my personal experiences, you probably know, I joined Bayer in the middle of the pandemic. My first 6 months was completely virtual, and trying to really navigate a huge global and complex organization virtually sitting in my home office was quite an experience. But more importantly, as we reflect on what's happening in the last 2 years, I will put a couple hypotheses on the table. I think going forward, the future of work is moving us further and further away from what I would consider the one-to-one boss to subordinate relationship. Right? Rather, I see the future organization as being tested in the last 2 years is an organization that become of a curated work and marketplace. What that means is the talents become a lot more fluid in terms of their ability to choose and work on different projects that might be close to them geographically, but maybe somewhere halfway around the world. They will have the ability to work on with different leaders and different topics that not only drives the development of their skill set, but also drive the overall advancement of the growth that the organization need to see. In other words, we're truly breaking the boundary of fixed job descriptions, fixed locations, and fixed bosses. So that clearly puts both challenges and opportunities in terms of leadership. How do we lead, right? Talent expectations are clearly changing. The kind of leadership we need today and tomorrow are very, very different from the kind of leaders that we have seen in the past year or past 5 years. The kind of learning opportunity that we need to create for the leaders is truly moving from going to the classroom, having a fixed curriculum, to learning from anywhere, anytime, any subject. Personal trade-offs become equally important. I think the pandemic challenged all of us to really re-examine our personal values, what's important to us. Work-life balance really is taking on a new meaning. So as leaders, how do we get our mindset around what that means for individual employees, as well as collectively for the team and the function they lead, and be able to find the right balance become a really critical task. At the same time, we all know that return to work is one of the hot topics right now. Where do we work? What is the meaning now of physical workspace? And I will hypostulate this to say the workplace is no longer just a place to work. Office become what we internally call the 3 Cs plus one. The 3 Cs is office work becomes a place to collaborate, to co-create in terms of content, and also to celebrate. But there's also 1 C that's really important, which is you need to have coffee, right? You need to have ways to bring people together, bring teams together so they see the meaning of office is something that they will want to. It's no longer a must, but rather that creates the pull for them to come in. And the 3 Cs and the one to me is really, really important. That also means the mobile working solutions need to be put in place so that we can truly create the kind of environment that is inclusive, diverse, but yet interactive that we want to see. And this, by the way, is one from a digital and technology perspective. At least personally, I haven't seen a perfect solution yet. So it'll be really interesting to see how can we use solutions to really help create that kind of virtual space that's as seamless and as interactive as possible. The third piece here is clearly how we work. As I mentioned earlier, my hypothesis is if we think about the future workspace, it's no longer a job description for someone to say this is everything you need to do, but rather it's going to be a lot more real-time collection of projects that get assigned and that get managed by different people, different groups, based on their skill set, based on their interest, based on what the organization needs at the time. So what does it mean in terms of how we work? That means any individual would have the possibility of working with different teams, different bosses, and having different work environment that accommodate the need of these projects. And the ability for us then creating inclusive environment that truly take on a different meaning. So what does it mean for us to create inclusiveness? What does it mean to look at organization effectiveness in terms of empowerment, in terms of decision-making, in terms of accountability? Those, in my mind, all become topics for us as we think about this future of work. So let's maybe dive a little bit deeper into, especially the leadership topic, which is close to my heart, right? Especially in this environment, what kind of leadership do we need to be able to lead, again, not just today, but the future? So here's a bit of a working definition, what I call sort of transformational leadership. A future leader, especially now, more important than before, need to have the ability to motivate, need to have the ability to really cast a vision. So even when the going gets tough, even when the environment is uncertain, they have the ability to give the comfort, right? And assurance, not necessarily certainty, but comfort and assurance that we got your back. We have a plan of where we need to get to it, and we are all in this together. And to me, that vision and that motivation is more critical than ever before. But in addition to that, a transformation leader is someone who truly plays the role of a coach and a mentor rather than a manager. And this coach and mentor creates that environment, right? This leader is an environment creator, as I call them, who really allows the talent to be at their best and continue to remove roadblocks that might be hindering the organization and talent's development, cutting through organization red tapes, continue to simplify and accelerate process so that an environment is agile and flexible and meaningful. And I think really importantly, creating that sustainable and inclusive work environment so that the talent can be successful is important. Because remember, today, this is a talent market. This is a place where we see talent, if they don't agree with an organization's vision, if they don't like the environment they're in, it is very, very easy for them to say, I'm leaving this workplace and find something else, right? The hurdle or the barrier to exit is very, very low today. So the responsibility now truly is on the leaders to say, I need to become that leader that my talent wants to work with and wants to stay and want to grow. And what's really critical behind this sort of so-called transformational leadership is, I will say, two mindsets I will specifically call out. First mindset is this sustainable leadership mindset. Sustainability here is more than just how do we address carbon dioxide emission? How do we think about what's happening in developing countries? And how do we think about supply chain? But sustainability here is thinking about an organization renewal. How do you renew the energy of the organization, the energy of the talent that have gone through so much and continue to bring the sense of purpose and sense of energy to work? And that sustainability, I would argue, is probably more important than ever. Because without that sense of energy in the organization, talents will not be engaged, let alone trying to deliver what the organization is asking them to do. The second critical mindset is growth mindset. I think this is oftentimes a misnomer that when the leaders get to a certain position, they know everything and they don't need to develop anymore. And we know that's clearly not true. I think especially in today's world and age, a leader's ability to continue to say, the world is changing at a speed that my past experiences sometimes is no longer enough or even relevant for me to address the issues. I need to keep an open mind of not only leveraging the best voice to the table so that we continue to find the solutions and chart the course, but I need to demonstrate that learning and growth mindset in terms of the ability to absorb new informations, ability to connect new dots, and ability to invite other voices to the table. So that sustainability mindset and that growth mindset is absolutely critical to drive this, what I call transformation leadership. So I want to touch on I&D for a minute. To me, inclusion and diversity is really at the heart of this transformation leadership. We all know the importance of I&D, but at the same time, this changing workplace that I just described, especially this hybrid working, in my mind, creates both opportunities and challenges in terms of our effort in terms of inclusion and diversity. You might know that at Bayer, we have set very ambitious goals, which you see here on the page. Specifically, we said we want to reach gender parity across all managerial levels by 2030. The challenge, if you look at just that particular target, we know that this changing workplace have double-edged sword. We know by research that women tend to take more flexibility than men. Women tend to have a different definition of work-life balance. And in some ways, from a professional perspective, people might argue that women tend to have been more willing to sacrifice their advancement for finding that balance for their family and for their personal life. We also know that from past research, when giving that flexibility, women would tend to then show up in the office less often, therefore less physical face time. So think about what does that mean, right, from an inclusion and diversity perspective. But at the same time, I also believe that if we do this hybrid working, this mobile working environment right, and be able to really create that curated workplace that I refer to, it actually offers maximum advantage to all talent, not just women, but also talent from different socioeconomic classes, different backgrounds, because then we are basically putting that kind of choice of flexibility in the hands of talent to say, you do you do what's best for you, and we'll make sure that you thrive on the equal footing. So both opportunities and challenges, and I think for us, the learning for us here at Bayer is putting down this set of commitment is important, and be able to address them on specific actions is more critical than ever. And we highlight them in the 3 buckets that you see on the bottom of the page. When we think about inclusive talent development, this is not just focusing on particular gender or particular group, because my personal belief is if you can do talent development right, that the rising tide raises all boats, as we say, right? And creating the transparency, creating the objectivity, and based on insights, be able to look at talent management process. Not only women will benefit, but different kind of minority groups will benefit, because now you're creating that the level footing that is data driven and performance driven. We also are focusing a lot on looking at fairness and respect at work. What does that mean? That is basically trying to remove unconscious biases in our systems and processes. Everything from looking at our family leave policy, looking at gender pay equity as a starting point, but then be able to really leverage our business resource groups. We have a number of very active business resource groups across the company. Strengthen their voice, strengthen their roles so that they can contribute to how do we really create that equal playing field for everybody. But now, last but not least, we basically hold ourselves accountable and say, we want to continue to drive the understanding of what inclusion and diversity is through unconscious bias training, through dialogues and discussions, and also be able to externally share our learnings. So publishing gender equity pay report, publishing our inclusion diversity report as part of our annual report. Those are some of the commitments that we say we got to continue to make so that we hold ourselves accountable for this set of commitments. Okay, so this all sounds great. So what's the implication for HR? There are many folds, and I'm just highlighting a couple things for us to really think about some of the key areas that we need to start addressing now. If we really think about this future environment, right, where work is flexible, workplace is flexible, it challenges how we think about the traditional organization structure and how we think about promotion and how do we think about work scope. So from HR's perspective, thinking about how do we support organization development and organization effectiveness? How do we think about learning that is no longer one pathway for everybody, right? But having that future-oriented learning that upskills, that is driven by business needs as well as individual ambitions and excitement becomes really, really critical. And last but not least, right, I would posit to say that instead of talking about strategic workforce planning, it's time for us to talk about strategic skills planning, right? For all the reasons that we just described. What organization and business need is not a workforce plan from a FTE perspective. Because remember, FTEs now is broken up, not full FTEs, but rather individual based on skill sets. And really challenging the businesses to say, articulate what exactly is the skill sets we need today, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and be able to articulate those in a set that put in front of the talents, say, these are the kind of skill sets that organization need in the future. If you are interested, how do we help you get there in terms of building the development so that you build that skill set for the future is going to be really critical. And in some ways, this is where technology has to play a critical role. So let me come to sort of some of my early thoughts, especially talking about HR in the digital age, right? We talked a lot about the need for digital solutions to make hybrid working work, to create that virtual inclusive environment and workspace. But from an HR tools perspective, you see sort of 3 buckets here that I will highlight. creating that end-to-end employee experience is probably more critical than ever, right? We all got an iPhone, we got the apps. Nobody need to go through a training class to learn how to use these apps, right? So how do we make sure that we have that same kind of employee experience platform that is truly intuitive in terms of interface, no training required, that drives, I will argue, 90% of HR related topics to self-service, and managing this end-to-end from hire to retire in a seamless way. That becomes absolutely critical for us. Next generation learning and development, I already touched on this. Having some sort of guided but not restricted learning path that really balances the future skill set needs for the organization as well as individuals' ambition and excitement is going to be critical. Learning anywhere, sitting in my bed, pulling up my iPad, be able to do a 5-minute course training is going to be more important than me having to block off 2 weeks and go somewhere. Yeah. Last but not least, be able to really drive talent management. Yeah. Driving talent management with AI powered so that we bring objectivity and data insights analytics to decision making. And so these are some of the ideas, again, early on, but how do we, most importantly, how do we make all these work in a seamless space? Lots of applications out there today, but remember, we gotta focusing on creating that seamless employee experience as easy and as painless as possible. All right, so with that, I will wrap up some of my thoughts. Clearly, this is an ongoing journey for all of us, and I look forward to your Q&A.
Wonderful, Sarena. Thank you so much for those insights. And we already have some questions coming in from our audience. I want to sneak in one of my own quickly. You spoke so poignantly about what it means to be a leader in the digital age. And I'm imagining many people are listening to your keynote and your thoughts thinking, how do I make sure I am that leader? If I am in a managerial position and I'm trying to be all these things, all the things that you spoke about that make up good leadership, how do I, because it can be lonely sometimes in those positions, right? How do I make sure I'm doing the right thing, that I have the right qualifications, etc.?
I think it's a wonderful question. I think the truth is it starts with self-awareness. And I talked about growth mindset. We all have our own blind spots, but it starts with recognizing that we have our own blind spots and almost put a bit of a quest on the table so that let me understand my blind spots so I can work on that. And how do you find your blind spots? You ask, right? Ask your team, ask your peers, ask your colleagues. How did I show up? How did I show up? Did I show up as someone who is empathetic and listening? Or am I showing up as someone who is self-centered, right? As a comparison and contrast. Collecting that feedback so that you have enough of data point about yourself and be able to reflect on that and think about the areas that you want to work on is really important. But I will say though, at least my experience at Bayer, as well as in my previous experiences, we all have wonderful colleagues and employees around us. Everybody is willing to help. It's a matter of whether you ask for that help or not. And as leaders, not being afraid to help and show our own blind spots is actually a fantastic role modeling skill as well, because then it tells people that it's okay. It is safe, right? To say that I don't know, please help.
Simple but great advice. Go ask. I want to turn to our audience questions now, so I'll read these out for you. Do you emphasize learning in the network for leaders at Bayer? The person is writing, as structures, processes, goals become more fluid, it seems important to enable leaders to help employees build, rebuild, and manage new connections. How are you going about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would say it needs to come both ways. We also know that, for going back to also the previous question, for leaders to really transform, that's not an overnight process. Right? Leaders also need support and need a bit of structure and scaffolding, right? If you think about building a building and you need scaffolds around it to make sure that the building can grow, just like leaders need scaffolding to do that. So at Bayer, we are trying to balance both. On one hand, we said, here's expectations of the leaders, and you absolutely need to take that learning journey on your own and be able to learn on one hand. But on the other hand, from an HR perspective, we're saying that we're giving you tools so that you can do so. What are these tools? Take performance management, for example. We're basically putting a set of tools and say, you've got to focus on the key moments of truth of when you interact with your employees. For example, during the first quarter, you have to sit down to have a goal-setting discussion. Every quarter, you need to have check-ins. Last quarter, you need to sit down and be able to give an annual performance review. Those are expectations, right? And by putting these expectations on the leaders, our goal is that they become learning opportunities for leaders to be practicing these kind of dialogues, right? And get better over time. So they become part of how they operate as a leader and not just simply HR processes that they need to follow.
Right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next question that was posted is, what is Bayer doing in terms of real-time learning to make learning less reactive?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning there. So we have a what we call a Go Learn platform, where an employee literally could find any courses and click on the button and learning starts. Right? So we're definitely following this sort of learning anytime, anywhere, any topic type of a concept. And we've been running that for a couple of years now. But I will say this, though, going back to my earlier comment, that by itself is not sufficient, because learning anywhere, learning anytime also require guidance in terms of, so we as an organization, what kind of skill set do we really need, right? 3 years from now, so that we can help guide our employees to say, learn this set of topics, but not this, right? So that they become even more relevant and valuable, at least for Bayer, right? So I think it's both. It's creating that kind of very fluid, very open learning platform, which we already have today, together with guidance on the side that says, assuming that you want to continue to develop and grow here at Bayer, these are the kind of skill sets that we would encourage you to explore based on your experience. And these are the potential pathways of how you can get there from a learning perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It also made so much sense to me, like from somebody who runs a company that works decentrally, most people work mobilely, everything that you were saying about end-to-end employee experience and the seamlessness of it. However, I can imagine there are smaller companies listening that perhaps don't find it so intuitively easy to build these systems. What would your advice be to them?
Well, I would think that I would say that part of the challenge of being in a big organization is that you need these systems to make sure that an organization of 100,000 employees have access to it. I would hope that in the smaller and medium-sized companies with a smaller employee base, it actually gives you more flexibility and agility, right? You don't need large systems to put these in place, right? Because these concepts hopefully are intuitive that says, learning pathway, it's not one. It is about supply and demand, right? Focusing on employee interest, focusing on really articulating for your own organization, what's the 3 critical skill sets and capabilities that you absolutely need to have 3 years from now. Put those 2 together. It could be as simple as that. So I would encourage, I think to me, this is not about designing large systems. We have to do that simply because of our size and scale, right? But I actually think that I actually envy smaller organizations that can continue to pilot and fast fail, right? And be able to find out what's the best system for you.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's, again, great advice. And maybe just a very quick answer to the question that came in, as every company has different challenges. How do you go about trial and error and taking learnings from your errors? I know it's a complex question, but maybe just a very quick answer.
I was going to say, that's a pretty big question, isn't it? I will start to say, the only thing I will say is a leader needs to role model and create that environment, right? If a leader that says, we're going to go 80-20, here's the decision we're going to make without all the full set of data, and it is okay we fail. You have to give the organization the permission to experiment and the permission to try. A leader has to be the one saying that. So once you start doing that, that's the snowball effect you can create to create the kind of culture that you want.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your inspiring insights, Sarena, and for being part of Work and Culture today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.